Okay, so if you want to buy a property in one of the more developed, mature Western markets like Sydney, New York, Toronto, LA, Vancouver, one of these developed, mature places, you're going to have to put down a significant amount of money for a deposit. And the thing is, most people don't realize this, but you can actually take that same deposit and you can invest it into 2 to 3 properties in an emerging property market. Somewhere in Southeast Asia or even Latin America will allow you to purchase 2 to 3 properties for the same amount of money that you would place down for a Western deposit. And then you can rent those properties out for very close to, if not even more rental yield than if you were to hold a New York, Sydney, and LA property, or one of those cities that I just mentioned. And in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how you can fund your first offshore property. You see, one of the reasons why you're going to want to do this is because what most people do when they invest into real estate is they'll buy properties where they live, in the city they live, the neighborhood they live, somewhere that they are familiar with, but typically in the place that they spend all of their time. And while there's nothing really wrong with that, if you look at the stock market, most people who invest in stocks will tell you to diversify your portfolio. So you've got stocks in different industries and things to that nature. But typically most people, when they're investing in property, they don't do this. They put all of their money into properties in the place that they live, which means that they are placing a huge amount of risk on their portfolio, because if something happens in that city, you're really exposed. If, for example, you're buying property in a mining town and suddenly the mining industry dries up, well, the value of those properties are going to go down, people are going to leave, there's not going to be any jobs, and so you're going to be heavily affected because you haven't diversified your property portfolio. So this is why a lot of smart investors will actually look to other markets outside of their country of citizenship so that they can diversify their property portfolio and be covered if there's any major events. A black swan event like a pandemic or a war, for example, could completely destroy your property portfolio if you have everything in one place. But even if you're not necessarily concerned about a black swan event, anything can happen to the market, so you just want to be covered. And the idea of investing in different property markets, usually emerging property markets that most people typically don't look to, is called property arbitrage, which is where you're earning money in the US, for example, you're earning US dollars, and you're taking those US dollars and you're investing into property in the Philippines. And if you buy the right property, you can then rent it out for rental yields very similar, if not more than where you currently live. Because many of these countries are attracting Western tourists. They're typically happy to pay Western prices if they're renting out or if they're an expat for the quality, because people like to maintain their quality of living even if they're living in the Philippines, Vietnam, Brazil, wherever it is. And so this is called property arbitrage. Now guys, if you are new here, my name is Jordan and this channel is all about achieving freedom, time, location, financial freedom. One of the best ways to do that is to purchase properties in other countries to diversify your portfolio, but also to buy them with less money. You can put less money down to buy these properties, and they're usually going to have a higher ceiling because most of these emerging markets are growing. People are moving to the cities. These countries are urbanizing. They're getting more wealthy. They want to spend money to live in good places, good neighborhoods, and this is the opportunity that you can take advantage of. So how do you actually invest in your first offshore property? I'm going to walk you through 3 different ways that you can do that. So the first way is just by paying cash for the property. But the thing is, if you live in one of these Western markets, you have a job, let's say in Toronto, the cost of living is pretty high. You're spending a lot of money on rent, groceries, going out, entertainment, things like that. It can be very hard for you to save enough money to place into an emerging market. The value of earning in these currencies allows you to purchase property at below market prices. And even if you were to save $50,000, you're still going to have to put that into a property, take on all of the debt, sign up for a mortgage for 30 years, and then hope and pray that the value of that property doesn't go down. Most people in the West are placing all their eggs in one basket, assuming that if they purchase a property at these above market prices, in my opinion, that the value of that property is going to go up. And historically they have continued to go up slowly but surely. But at some point, there's going to be a change. Now, this isn't financial advice. This is my personal opinion. If you look at a Western market and compare it to an emerging market, you're paying all of that money for a property that's valued at 500K, 600K. In Australia, it's about 800, 900K on average to buy a property somewhere in Australia. If you save enough money for a deposit and you buy one of these properties, you're hoping the value of that property is going to go up. It's a significant risk that you're taking on. Whereas you can buy a property in an emerging market for much less risk because it's cheaper. And the ceiling on those properties are going to be much higher because you know that these countries are developing. There's massive amounts of investment. People are becoming wealthier. If you buy it in a big city, for example, you know there's going to be a lot of movement into that city, a lot of immigration from around the country that you're investing in. If you look at Vietnam as an example, lots of people are moving to Ho Chi Minh or to Hanoi, even Da Nang in the center. These cities are attracting a lot of people, a lot of tourism. So you know if you buy a property at a low price, the chances of it going higher is much more likely than if you buy a property in New York that's well overvalued and hope that it goes up. So if you're living in a place like Toronto, going back to my earlier example, then there's two things that you can do to try and pay for a property in cash. The first one is to use geographic arbitrage. So basically try and get a job that's online, or if you've currently got a job, try and get that into some kind of online arrangement, remote working arrangement, and then go and live somewhere else with a much lower living cost. This way you can save up more money to invest in your first offshore property. Another option is to create an online income stream. So you can keep your job and still set up an online income stream, or you can quit your job, start a business and go all in. Either way, you want to be earning in strong currencies so that you can deploy that currency into undervalued emerging markets. So that's one way you can invest in your first offshore property. Now, the second way to invest in your first offshore property is through partnerships and syndication. So in simple terms, basically using other people's money to fund your property investment. So you can partner with people who you might already know, who want exposure to global real estate markets. You can find the deal, you can structure the deal, you can get everything together, and then you can partner with people who do have the capital to invest. You basically become the bridge between someone who is looking for that new opportunity and then finding and negotiating and actually getting the opportunity done. And so because you are the bridge between those two things, you can take a percentage of that deal. For example, if you find a $200,000 property in Mexico by the beach, you get two people to put in 100K each and you'll take 10 to 20% in equity. The reason why you're going to take 10 to 20% is because you've sourced the deal and you've managed the process of actually making it happen. So that's another way for you to fund your first offshore property investment. Another way to do it, and this is a little bit more nuanced because it depends on where you're buying the property and the rules and regulations, but you can set up a creative financing structure when you go to invest in these properties. So the most obvious thing you could do is find a country where you can open a bank account and those banks are going to lend you money for a mortgage, just like you would back home. You might have to put down a much bigger deposit, 40 or 50%, but if the value of the property is 150K, for example, you're still putting down less money as a deposit to buy that property than you would in the West. In some countries, you might have to set up your own company in order to do this. So like I said, there's different rules and regulations depending on where you want to buy the property. So make sure you do your own due diligence, you understand the rules, speak to a lawyer, or if you need help with that, you can check out the link in the description below this video. But that's obviously one of the easiest ways to do it. Just find a country that allows foreigners, or at least foreigners of your nationality, to get a mortgage. Another thing you can do when it comes to creative financing is you can negotiate directly with the developer and you can pay for that property in installments just like you would with a mortgage, but instead of taking on the debt of a mortgage, you're paying cash, but you're doing it in installments. So that depends on the relationship that you have with the developer or the seller or the vendor, and usually that's kind of like a one-on-one agreement. And of course that would all be legalized. You'd use a lawyer to get all of this done, but you'd make that agreement between you and the person that you're getting the property from. So an example of creative financing would be, maybe you want to get a property in the Philippines, you'd put 40 or 50% down to get the property, and then you'd negotiate with the developer to pay in installments over the next 5 years or so. This way you're paying in installments whilst also renting out the property. The rent pays for the installments that you've got to give to the developer or the seller, and then everyone's happy. So those are the three ways that you can fund your first international property investment: cash, geographic arbitrage, currency arbitrage, earning in strong currencies, investing that money into emerging markets, lowering your living costs, ideally making money online or creating some kind of online income stream. That's number one. The second way to do it is through partnerships and syndications. So partner up with people who do have the capital, make the deal happen, manage that process, and then take a percent of equity from that deal. If you do this enough times, you'll save up enough money to buy your first offshore property. And then the third way to do it is through creative financing. So negotiating with the vendor, the seller, the developer for favorable terms, paying in installments, putting down a much larger deposit, reducing the size of those installments, extending the period of time that you have to pay off the property, maybe even investing into a country that allows you to take on a mortgage. You have to do your own due diligence, of course. Make sure you use the right lawyer who can get the deals done, but this will allow you to effectively own property in another country without all the risk, bringing it right down and hopefully having a property that has a huge ceiling compared to the West. So guys, if you've got any questions, let me know in the comments below and I'll see you in the next one.